Hi, this is Piero San Giorgio. Today we are the 10th of December and I'm in Cape Town, South Africa. For those of you who don't know me, I am the author of this book, Survive the Economic Collapse, which was out and had great success in France and now is out in English and hopefully soon in other languages. This is not my only book, there's others that are in French, but this one is the only one out in English at this time. So I'm here in South Africa. I'll show you the beautiful Table Mountain from behind. Yeah, I love this place and I love this country. It's really a great place. Now, the topic of today is that is South Africa a good place to survive the economic collapse? As for those of you who read my book, I'm talking about the unfortunate situation that we are all living in, that is, in my opinion, because of depletion of natural resources, because of destruction of the environment, and because of the crazy financial economy that the globalized world is built upon, is going to collapse and create a lot of damage and, I think, survival threat for most of people. Now, the question is how to survive, and that's what I deal in the book. But as you will know if you've read the book, geography and the social construct of the place you are living or you want to live to survive is fundamental. So, of course, it's very hard to talk about a country so large and so rich as in history and in economy as South Africa in a few minutes. But I'll try, especially today, by the way, the 10th of December, is the day that there is homage here to former President Nelson Mandela, which maybe I'll talk a little bit about. And most leaders of the world are coming here to kind of pay homage to this man who was so important in the history of South Africa. Now, of course, there's pros and cons about Nelson Mandela. To give you my opinion, I was first time I came in South Africa was in 1995. At the time, I was running the marketing for Oracle Africa, which was all of Africa excluding South Africa. But of course, I set up a lot of collaboration with the guys who were running. Actually, it was a woman who was running marketing in South Africa, and generally speaking, the people working in South Africa to help us, especially throughout Southern Africa, countries like Zimbabwe, but also Madagascar. And therefore working on with South Africa was at that point starting to become common for me. So I've been coming here since 1995, maybe twice a year, sometimes more, sometimes less. And even when I had my own business, I did a lot of I did a lot of work here in South Africa with big companies like Telkom, with distribution, of course, Anglo-American, the big mining companies and so on. Of course, recently as well, I started a lot of distribution networks for software companies in South Africa. And so I don't know the country super well, but I know it a lot. And I have lots of friends here, which I meet every time I come. So let me first start a review. When considering South Africa as a place to survive, well, first of all, let's consider two things. If you are born here and you know the place, it's already a plus because you know people, you have a network of friends, of colleagues, of family. If you think of coming here, as a lot of people do today, because life is still fairly inexpensive, weather is great, food is fantastic, people I think are really great here. The women are still women. Not only are they extremely beautiful, and I like you. But definitely they are very feminine. This is a country where feminism has not done as much damage as everywhere else. So women are still women, and men therefore behave as men, and they are courteous and gallant and respectful to women. And women are sexy, they are feminine, they dress well, and yet they are working and intelligent. And so that you can be feminine and being a normal human being. It's okay. So it's a very interesting country for that as well. Now, if you want to come here because the people are great, because the sun is great, the agriculture is great, we'll talk about that later. Sure, why not? but you will lack the network. You will lack the people to know, to help you when things are going to be tough, and things are going to be tough. So it's the very first important step is if you have no choice and you're living here, okay, we're going to talk about the pros and cons of South Africa. If you have a choice and you can either move away or stay here, well, if you want to stay here, really think about the fact, do you know the people? Are you going to be accepted? It's not going to be easy. And if you're South African and want to leave, the same way, are you going to have a network elsewhere? And are you also going to countries that are going to be worse? You know, if you move to the UK, the weather, the people, maybe it's much worse than South Africa. And you think, and if you think of criminality, well, today maybe it's lower than South Africa, and we'll also talk about that. But maybe in the future it's going to be much worse in the UK than in South Africa. Now, that's about the first point. Second point, geography. Now, South Africa is far away from everyone. You know, it's south, so it's far from Argentina, it's far from Asia, it's far from Australia, it's far from Europe, far from America. And in between, there's oceans, and there's the whole continent of Africa, which is not exactly the place you travel like that, and you take your car and you go from Congo and you drive down to Johannesburg. It's not easy, it's not that simple. So you're fairly much isolated. And sure, you have people crossing the borders, swimming across a crocodile-infested Limpopo to come and work here, but it's not like you're going to have mass immigration from countries that are going to be destroyed by an economic collapse. I mean, how worse can Zimbabwe be from what it has been the last 15 years? Not much worse. How worse could Africa be? I mean, actually, Africa is doing pretty good, and in the economic collapse, in the collapse of the global economy, it's not going to suffer proportionally as much as the Western developed, so-called developed world. So that isolation is not, you're not going to have massive waves of immigration as the world economy is worsens. So that isolation is a plus. The second element is that if you look at the history of South Africa, of course, if you know the place, you know what I will briefly talk about. You know about that this is one of the first settlements of Europeans in Africa. This started way before many others. This is one of the very first settlements from the Dutch, Portuguese, Dutch, and then when the British came, there was this long clash between Dutch settlers, the Afrikaners, and the more recent Dutch and French and other settlers. And actually the Boer, the Afrikaners, they kind of became very tough, not only because at the time everybody was tough, but also because of the Great Trek when they moved to Transvaal, which is now Gauteng, around Johannesburg, Pretoria area, and also some when they moved in other lands over there. That was tough, that was rough. And then the British came after them, and there was the Boer War, which was a terrible war with guerrilla war, with concentration camps done by the British to concentrate and eventually kill a lot of civilians from the Boer, and then there was another insurrection, 1914, and this was tough. And even in World War I, South Africans were heavily involved in the war, especially in Africa. And for people who don't know, but World War I in Africa was a significant change for Africa. It was a big, much more than World War II. I mean, everybody knows the Africa Corps and all that stuff in Libya and Egypt. But World War I had much more fighting in Africa, and it was much tougher. And it had profound, significant importance in the relationship between black Africans and white Africans, as well as white settlers. Very important changes started in World War I. Anyways, so if you know the history, what's very interesting about South Africa is probably one of the few countries that actually wanted its own independence as, I think it was 1949, where it first of all had independence from the UK and Commonwealth, but had this, what they called the Apartheid regime, which means separated development, which actually was not a stupid idea at all. The idea was to have, you know, black Africans living in their own lands, and white settlers, white Africans, living in their own lands and having separation. Of course, they didn't do that because it was so easy to get black laborers in the fields, in the houses, at extremely low wages. So they didn't develop in a separate way at all. In fact, it was exploitation, and it's sad because in fact it is a very good idea, I think, to let people and population live on their own, and let's not colonize people, let's not influence people. I mean, leave them the fuck alone, leave them develop with their own culture, with their own traditions. Maybe do trade, but don't say that and then hire them as maids, as nannies, as sugarcane cutter workers in the fields. So in the end, it was flawed because of you cannot have, in French we say le beurre et l'argent du beurre. You cannot have the advantages without the disadvantages of any situation. So I think that there was a mistake, and in the end, in the long run, actually, this mistake could be an advantage for South Africa. Let me explain why. When the world started to have this embargo, because suddenly they felt that South Africa was treating bad, or actually not letting black South Africans access democracy and voting rights and so on, and that will lead me to Mandela. Well, it actually put in the mind of a lot of South Africans the concept of self-sufficiency and authorship. Because of the embargo, it was hard to get fuel, it was hard to get weapons to defend the country. And remember, at the time there were still hostile communist regimes in Zimbabwe, in Maputo is Mozambique, Zambia, Angola, and it was a state of war for South Africa. And despite that, the Western world put embargo, and of course the communist world as well, put embargo on South Africa, and only a few countries were either sneaking its way through the embargo or actually didn't give a fuck, like Israel, who never gives a fuck as long as there's money to be made and influence. That's normal. And basically, it was tough for South Africans in terms of fuel, in terms of petrol, in terms of chemicals, in terms of supplies, in terms of exports. So they kind of had this mentality of let's get on our own. Let's have self-sufficiency for food, for energy. They even revamped the old German techniques to generate oil from coal, which they have here, etc. And so it was interesting. A lot of South Africans which I meet and some of my clients here, they actually have this mindset. They say, well, of course we have to be self-sufficient, and they think very clearly in terms of water, food, energy, fuel, defense, etc. It's very natural to them, much more natural than Europeans today, much more natural than lots of people around the world, which is a very positive attitude. Now, of course, after the embargo, when basically Botha and de Klerk, and with the liberation of Mandela, which was kind of a head figure, and probably exaggerated, and probably it was mythified. Yeah, the guy was not a saint, and so on. But after so many years in jail, I think he grew wise, and he dropped the terrorist activities. And actually, I think he was really a good man to understand that you had to reconcile the people, and you couldn't just go for revenge. A revenge which I think would have been stupid, counterproductive, but also I think would have been immoral, because they would, revenge for what? For being hired as nannies, for not having the right to vote? I mean, then most of the world has to get revenge and revolt today, because there's no democracies anymore in the world. So anyway, I don't want to go into polemics here, but certainly Mandela did a great good, because with his leadership, he kind of reconciled the people and said that they have basically to build a new country together rather than go over old histories and old maybe hateds and old racism, because there was lots of that, and so he did a great deal of good things, and a lot of the policies he made are actually appreciated by white South Africans very, very much, and actually he's really, really appreciated by all communities here. There's at least 12 major language and ethnic groups in South Africa that have to coexist. This is not easy. This is not an easy task. It's harder than most countries. So he succeeded in that, and I think this is very, very advantaged, because even today, very few people have racial resentment. Sure, there's politics. There are people who want to use the race card in both ways to say, oh, the government is blacks and it's corrupted and they don't let the whites in, and there is discrimination against the whites. And then the other side, some people say, well, our ethnicity is discriminated by other ethnicities. And sometimes, yeah, you also have the people who say, well, we used to be exploited, therefore we have the right today to exploit or to do better or to be positively discriminated. Sure, there is some of that. But generally people, they want to go ahead, they want to work, they want to move on. And there's not, and also, by the way, there's not just blacks and whites. There are what they call the Malays, you have the Cape Colored, you have Asians from India, from Pakistan, from China in South Africa. It's a very, very multicultural, mixed society. And even mixed now more and more racially, as there are starting to be interracial marriage. I know that racial or racial are words that are politically incorrect to use, but I don't know how to use any different. When a black woman marries a white man, how do you call that? Interethnic? No, it's interracial. It's okay for me. I mean, do what you want. And but it's still low, and I think it's good that it's low, because I think people should stay with their own people. But that's my opinion, and respect me for my opinion. Otherwise, I beat you up. But it's also okay. It's not what I would like to do, but it's also okay if white people, black people, Asian people fuck together and eventually get married, have kids. I mean, there are advantages and disadvantages to do that. Do what the fuck you want. That's I'm libertarian. I like freedom, so do what you want. I just don't like that to be a policy. Okay, that said, now if you consider that ethnicity and you consider the geography of South Africa, where you have pretty dry lands in the inside, and you have seasonal rain patterns that gives fertile land in some areas, but dry and semi-desertic areas in the others. Where you want to live is dependent of water, as I explained in my book. Is dependent of agriculture capable land, which South Africa is very good at, except in the Karoo, in the center or in the north, where it's much more drier. You also have mountains that you can choose. You have lands where it's the ethnicities are different. If you are in the Cape Province, you have a very mixed ethnic setup. If you are, for example, in KwaZulu-Natal, it's mostly black. And if you are in Port Elizabeth, for example, it's very much Asian. Lots of Muslim, and so that has impact in how people behave, in the culture they practice every day, and the relationship they have with each other. So all these elements are very important to factor. So of course, the best area is obviously Cape Town. The climate is fantastic. There's water. There's great productive land for wine. Here up north is Stellenbosch, fantastic area for wine. Great wine, South Africa. But also food. They produce oranges, fruits, dairy, everything you need for healthy and good food. Now the question is, will that be sufficient for everything, for everybody? And also, will the country continue to function with increasingly worsening economics and a potential, and I think soon, in the next decade, a full economic collapse of the global economy? So this is difficult to answer, because on one side, because of the habit and isolation of South Africa, in a way, of the habit of being isolated, the embargo, and being far away geographically from everywhere, it's a country that still have self-sufficiency in many ways. And suddenly, yes, maybe they will not export as much food, but certainly they will need it themselves, so they will rationalize the use itself. And the same for energy. They will not be able to import oil, so they will have to work economy that is less reliant on fossil fuels, and that will mean more bicycles, more public transport. And actually the World Cup in 2010 really helped develop public transportation, such as buses, such as trains, which were a bit lacking, to say the truth, in the past. So actually it was a successful event. I think it was obviously financially disaster, as these events always are, but it doesn't matter. As long as the infrastructure that was built is useful, it probably helped. Now, is the government going to function? I think probably yes, to some extent. A lot of governments in Africa function without the need of a very dense revenue from tax money. Of course, a little bit, but eventually they work through a lot of custom taxes, a lot of So sure, on one hand, they will have less income, so they will have a less powerful ability to have uh, workers and government employees to do a lot of the tasks. But on the other hand, when people feel the necessity to have a government that organizes some of the key infrastructure and supplies of the country, maybe people will still willing to contribute a little bit for its functioning. So maybe there's going to be a barter system and all that. The big asset, of course, here is still some natural resources like gold and other precious metals are still plentiful, and therefore the richness of South Africa is still strong, and they probably will be able to do some trade with other countries around the world, maybe on a much lower scale, but certainly these precious metals will be so needed and so valuable in the future that there will be some demand, and therefore South Africa will be able to import maybe some fuel, maybe some energy. It will be tough, but maybe it's possible. Now let's talk about violence and crime, because this is a topic that around the world everybody talks about South Africa as being this place with so much crime. I think it's true, but also not true. First of all, yes, sure, when you have people who are poor, and there are a lot of incredibly poor people here, especially the new immigrants, people who came to South Africa from Zimbabwe, from Congo, from other places that are in war or are in poverty. Sure, yes, you have people who are becoming criminal. My wife has a cousin here in South Africa. His wife got killed. He got killed by some Mozambique people up in the north towards Pretoria, and he had his farm. And of course, he was pretty old, but they came. They killed his wife, and then they went to trial. And then some of the brothers of the accused came back and killed him, with torture, with all these nasty things that only tribal people can do. And yeah, Africa is still tribal. And by the way, we are also tribal. It's just that we forgot about it. But give us a week without food, and we'll torture people just as bad as anyone else. So it's not something that are black, white. We all behave pretty bad if we push to our limits. Some people are already at that limit. That's the thing. At least that's my opinion. So yeah, that criminality is going to be a problem, and is a problem today. So actually, you do have today the big middle class in South Africa is black now, and they are the ones fighting against criminality the hardest. It's not the whites who are the most victims. They are victims of crime like everyone else, but the blacks, middle class, are also victims of crime. So, and because they vote, and because the government is representing the majority, which are blacks, of course, and therefore they put effort against criminality. So yeah, there has been horrible stories. There has been many people killed, slaughtered, tortured, raped, but it has decreased, and the government has put a lot of effort. So in fact, criminality has been fought upon, but more importantly, the vast majority of the population is against it. It's not anymore I'll kill you because you're white or something like that. Some of that still exists probably, but the vast majority of crimes are from people who are dirt poor to people which they assume have money, and they try to steal, and they use violence because that's the way it is. And these people react by having guns at home and having high security houses, security systems, and so on. Now, when the economy is going to collapse, this is going to be tougher. There's going to be more poor, more people going to use violence, and therefore people will have to defend themselves, both with passive defense, better defended homes, better defended houses, better defended communities. I know some communities here stick together and build defense compounds of full communities, sometimes thousands of people living in a small town which is completely defended with all the security and, of course, modern technology, but also the ability to revert to no technology at all, or very simple, crude systems of surveillance and alarm. And to that, of course, the weapons, the defense, the hunting rifles, and all that, and the other weapons that are available in South Africa to defend. And that organization is going to be fundamental. So defense is going to be a very important point. And so will be, of course, the social links, the social network. Who are the people you know? Who are the people you can rely upon to connect, to have help, to get medical assistance, to get help in security, in defense, in growing food, in exchanging, in trading, tools, etc. Because all of this is going to be more difficult than today. Today you go to the supermarket, you go to Walmart and all that. Not they don't have Walmart here. It's probably Woolworths or something like that, but or Tesco. But that's it. You will not have those things anymore. So you will need more and more reliance on your network of people. By the way, Cape Town is better for that because people are really in the mindset of that much more than Cape Town than Johannesburg or Pretoria. Pretoria, it's already more the Boer, the Afrikaner communities are still strong over there. But Johannesburg, Gauteng, Sandton, these rich places, not good. Typical windy Cape Town weather. I hope you can hear me. Anyways, so as I'm trying to explain succinctly and briefly, South Africa is a complex country. It's not a place that you can decide, say, oh, it's dangerous because black people hate white people. That's not true. It's not accurate to say that. Is it a country that has great economy in some ways? Yes. In some ways, it's difficult. It's a complex. It's a big, beautiful country. It's difficult to analyze it. But I just wanted to make you, 30 minutes overview of what I think is interesting in South Africa. So, as always, every case is specific. As I say to every one of my customers, as you may know, may not know, I do consulting for people who have, concerns about their security, and I give them a global approach and global assessment on how they're able, with their houses, with their assets, with either their finance, how they're able to cope with the survival of themselves and their family. So every case is unique. Every case is specific, and therefore I try to each time give a personalized view. But in that, you still have generalities, and generalities are based, as I say, on geography, on sociology, who are the people around you, the culture, what are the situation, what are the climate. And South Africa has pretty good, I think, advantages in that. It is a pretty good country. I think the big issue is how people relate to get together and to themselves. And I think, to conclude, that yes, people like Mandela, and to some extent other leaders of the last 20 years, they actually did a wise and good approach to make sure that there's no civil war, there's no ethnic war, ethnic cleansing in this country. And they did a good job, and for that, today is an interesting day, December 10th, 2013, to actually remember this Nelson Mandela, who actually was a great man into that reconciliation and making people not to kill each other and not turning this country either in a place of a bloodbath or economy that goes down the toilet like some others did in countries a bit north, like in Zimbabwe. So, all in all, South Africa is an interesting place. First of all, as long as the economy is not collapsed, I encourage you to visit. It's really beautiful. But if once it collapsed, I hope I hope you've read my book because you have a lot of tricks here, a lot of solutions on how you can prepare yourself. But in the meantime, if you need some help, contact me on my website piero.com. There's a lot to say. Contact me on from my website on my email. I can answer you some questions about South Africa, about even other places in Africa and elsewhere. So voila. So I leave you with this beautiful weather here. It's I love to come to Cape Town. It's a fantastic place. So take care, and I'll see you soon. Ciao.